Hi there, I'm Claire McDonnell Liu, and this is the Family Health Lab. In today's conversation, I'm talking big, fat health lies with Nina Teicholz. Listen in as Nina calls out the secretive money interests that are keeping us sick and sets out the foods that families really should be eating to stay well.
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Welcome to part 2 of my podcast chat with Nina. Wanting to get into how you got into nutrition because it wasn't particularly what you studied. You're an investigative journalist. That's a big topic. You call it a rabbit hole. So if you wouldn't mind talking through a little bit about your background there.
It's interesting in retrospect when I think about my life, because I grew up always battling with my weight and was in fact overweight, although not significantly so. But I went to nutritionists and dietitians and I have notes about, cut back on saturated fats in my notes, and I just never seemed to get any better. But it wasn't an area where I really did any research or I just thought, like, as most people do, there's something wrong with them or they're just not trying hard enough. So it should have come out of my own authentic interest or my own need, but it didn't. It came out of really two things. One was that I was writing a series of investigative food stories for a magazine in the U.S., and I was assigned a story on trans fats. And that story, the people that I interviewed for that story just sent off alarm bells in my head. I mean, there was the early trans fats researcher, Mary Enig, who was telling me, that people had been paid to harass her, that the editor of a journal she was publishing a paper in had been called up by the margarine industry or visited by the margarine industry and told not to publish her paper because trans fats were historically in margarine. I talked to people who were paid by the Oil Institute, the Edible Oil Institute, which is an industry group. They were paid to stand up and harass her at conferences. I spoke to people, academics, who I thought were, I thought academics were an untainted group of intellectuals. I spoke to academics who would hang up on the phone with me. They said, if you are going to challenge the low-fat diet, if you're going to take the Gary Taubes line, I can't talk to you. So this is the early 2000s where people felt they could not even speak. They could not even challenge the low-fat diet or their career would be at risk. So that sent off such alarm bells in my head that, and also as a journalist, I knew that was a story. There had to be a very interesting story there, and it turned out to be a huge story. I mean, obviously an ongoing story that we are still living with, of the level of corruption of our professional societies and academic institutions and the medical profession, the incredible intransience of a kind of nutritional dogma that turns out not to be supported by the science when it comes to saturated fats, vegetable oils, total fats, red meat. I mean, there's just so many areas where we're living with where the predominant beliefs are not based on any science and are basically lies. And so it interested me a great deal. And then there's a sort of another side to the beginnings of my interest in this, which is while I'm researching this trans fat story, I'm also writing a little restaurant review column in this free throwaway paper in New York City where we didn't have the money to pay for meals. So I would just rely on the chef to send out whatever he or she thought was the best food they had. And in those days, those innocent days in the early 2000s, they still sent out red meat, pate, various saturated fat and cholesterol rich foods. And things that I had never tasted before. So I found them exciting and textured and rich and interesting to eat these foods. I hadn't eaten red meat in more than 20 years. I stayed away from butter and rich cheeses or sauces. And miraculously, I found myself losing weight. Go to my doctor. He says, your cholesterol levels look just fine. So that was just my own personal mystery. How could this even be possible or be happening? So, I had, I think most people who know me know, I mean, I had been a vegetarian, largely a vegetarian for more than 20 years, which is, no red meat, very little meat at all, mainly plant-based foods and grains. So, I came into this really from the completely opposite perspective from the one that I have now.
Yeah, and then followed your journalistic, the way you kind of unraveled the story and became interested, and you had people hanging up on you. You had people kind of warning you off, setting off alarm bells, and then as things have unraveled, and this. We'll talk about your book that came out, and there's so many different topics to take this, really. But what I've always I've wanted to ask, didn't you kind of get scared away? When the alarm bells and you're thinking, great story, something's happening here, but there's another side of that. There's potentially, a fear factor. You're being warned off. People are having campaigns against them that can ruin their careers, really. You've likened this in other talks to dealing with the mob. I mean, it actually sounds at times like it was pretty scary, and you've had to hire a solicitor or a lawyer to take action. It has impacted on your life, and at times, did you ever have any regrets about pursuing the big story?
I think there's a certain kind of person, which I happen to be, who their true north is not necessarily, career, like being in the slipstream of a popular career move. Or, I wasn't in academia, I was in journalism, but I wasn't happy with the kind of journalism. I mean, I had done a lot of radio journalism, and I felt that it was just intellectually not that interesting because you could only go this deep into stories. So for me, feeling so compelled by this truth, I mean, I believe truth is a kind of justice. If you don't have the truth, especially in today's world where in so many areas we're being told things that are clearly untrue. And I grew up in a very academic, square, little bit nerdy family. And I think that, having a bead on seeking truth, and has really been my guiding light. And you're right. And I've also been, I think, naive about the costs of that and where it would lead me. But I haven't wanted to back down. I mean, I think that it's true. I've had to hire lawyers to tell people to stop defaming me or besmirching me. I have had lawyers to defend articles in journals, particularly the BMJ, that wanted to issue corrections that were untrue. So it has been, I mean, it is definitely a field where I can feel very much that there are forces against me. I know there are periodic meetings where people from some pharmaceutical company or Kellogg's or Unilever or Post cereal sit down and think, okay, where are we going to have the hit article on Nina today? Because now she's appearing more in the news. But I still think that that this is the right place to put my energy and efforts. And there's still so much to be done. And I also think that it's, I don't feel at all, I don't feel discouraged because I think there's a tremendous movement of people waking up around the world to various different kinds of truths. I think that especially in Western countries where we haven't been exposed to propaganda, we think we haven't been exposed to propaganda, we're not nearly as savvy as, say, the Chinese or the Russians, who are much more aware of the kind of doublespeak to which they're subjected. And now in the West, I think people are starting to understand, at least in parts of our countries, that there is this same problem is happening in our supposedly open, democratic, egalitarian, free speech based societies where we're understanding that we do not actually live in the kind of free and fair society that we thought we were. So I think there is still an opening I see a growing opportunity. And that optimism is also based on the fact that there is such a massive increase in the number of people who are discovering that they can reverse their diseases by just turning the food pyramid upside down, right? I mean, so that there's just the citizens movement out there is growing. I think, I think it's just growing algorithmically stronger every day.
It is.
So those things give me hope.
They give me hope as well. And I was also curious about your motivation to keep going. Which I think you explained beautifully, and you definitely have a lot of courage to take this on. And now there's more and more and more people coming out, and like you say, it's a grassroots movement of people who are ignoring their advice, the advice that they've been giving, ignoring the standard advice, and then collectively getting together around the Nutrition Coalition or the Public Health Collaboration or Low Carb Down Under, for example. And the access to information is really quite hopeful and positive, really. But it doesn't take away from what you know, all your kind of work and what you've gone through. Yeah, really, I do think so. Yeah, I think you've been very, very courageous to stand where you've stood.
Thank you. Well, I mean, and I'm not the only one, I mean, there's been Tim Noakes who went to trial, and Gary Fettke who had to fight to keep his medical license. And I mean, there have been others who've really suffered, I think, on the front lines as well.
And that's made it possible for more and more people to come out. And that comment that you made, that you think behind closed doors, perhaps people are discussing you and actually having meetings and perhaps really trying to target you. I mean, Gary Fettke, you mentioned, he works out of Tasmania, and he was targeted, and he found publications, and probably Belinda actually, his wife Belinda Fettke, found those publications, that the cereal industry were targeting him for doing what you're doing, for talking about healthy foods and science that doesn't stack up, and how to get well by not following the advice. So yes, lots going on behind the scenes, and you've said it a few times already. Lots more work to do. But I really do feel like you've changed the platform. You've made the foundation. Like just a stupid example is, I don't know if you have clover margarine. I nearly called it clover butter, but clover margarine in England. I think it's more of an English brand, but my family, when I was growing up, went up from butter, as the majority of families did, back over to margarine, with this beautiful branding and just lovely golden fields. It just couldn't look healthier and made to look like butter. And then I remember, my dad going back to butter, and just absolutely, a decade or so later, and he would not have read any of the science, perhaps all the advice, but it filtered down, percolated through. And I think that's what's happening, that percolation of, and he would say things like, ignore that, I'm not listening to that, but this is what my mum would have had, I'm going back to it. So, and he went back to salt, and he went back to real butter, and I don't think he ever went off his steaks, but I just feel that information is percolating down to members of the public, and
it is. Yeah. I mean, my book was, the book that I wrote, The Big Fat Surprise. I mean, that book was really the first time that anybody had pulled together all the arguments. And some of them were ones that I my own sort of discoveries of these arguments about various kinds of LDL, but really made a comprehensive argument for why we had gotten it wrong on saturated fats, and why saturated fats were not a health threat. So this is in 2014, my book came out. I remember not too long after, the head of McDonald's calling me and saying, we're going back to using butter in our muffins or our scones or whatever they had. And they said, that's because of your book. And it had an effect on all kinds of industries going back to butter. I mean, now the idea that saturated fats might not be bad for health is widespread, but that really I think was the contribution of my book. And actually the only publication before then that made the argument was an article that I wrote for Men's Health magazine in in the early 2000s, so maybe 2003. And the other argument that my book made, it was really the first to pull together all the science on seed oils, to say, and to say like, well, this is the history. They were used as machine lubricants. They came into the food supply as Crisco. They cause oxidation and inflammation, especially when heated. So, the danger of seed oils, that knowledge has exploded in certain circles, and certainly sort of on social media. And so I feel like those are real contributions I was able to make through my work. And, I've seen that kind of the awareness of those issues really. I mean, it really is the beginnings, along with the work of Gary Taubes, of course, the whole movement.
And we're still building on that information that came out. And as you say, comprehensive information came through your book. And then on a number of topics as well, the low fat, and also the flawed science that had been that had set out the flawed but also agenda-driven science that had given us our nutrition and guidelines, our policies, and what had become absolutely gospel, kind of set in stone nutrition laws. You completely upended and comprehensively and really, really well. It was 8 years of work and research that went into that book.
Yeah, It was. I mean, I was also having children, but it was a long and endurance. Yeah, it's sort of an endurance run to get that book done. It was. I think because it traces the politics, also the influence of industry that people really had not seen or understood, how the American Heart Association had been sort of, working with Procter & Gamble, the maker of vegetable oils. I mean, just the twisted political and sort of corrupt landscape that has really characterized the world of nutrition for the past 60 years. I don't think people understood the degree to which what we think we know today is a product of a very corrupt and imperfect scientific and political landscape in nutrition. I mean, it's really like we really see some of the tactics used were really like the tactics used by big tobacco. I mean, big food. There's one of the tobacco companies actually bought one of our largest food companies, Kraft and I think it was Kraft and RJR Reynolds, which was, tobacco and big food. They were basically the same people and the same tactics, right? So you accuse your opponents of having financial motives. You try to smear them. This is exactly what Ansel Keys did to John Yudkin, whose opposing theory that sugar caused heart disease was a threat to Ansel Keys, right? So you can see that and Ansel Keys just went after John Yudkin and sort of and really was able to banish Yudkin from the field or forced him into retiring himself because he was so intimidated by all these attacks. So those are big tobacco tactics. I mean, maybe big tobacco learned them from Ansel Keys because he was certainly one of their most aggressive proponents. So, I mean, that story of trying to understand what you think are pure and scientific ideas, when you understand, you pull aside the curtain, understand the backstory, it really allows your mind to open up and think about these supposed truths in very different ways.
Yes, and I've heard it said about you. I can't actually remember who to credit this comment, but that you've done more than anybody else to blow this wide open. I'm paraphrasing. And you being outside of nutrition academia and not having that background allowed you to do that. Like you were just saying, fresh eyes on a topic, able to kind of just walk through and kind of assess everything pretty cleanly. But I did read on Twitter recently. You wrote that you're getting comments about your book and people are thanking you for what it's doing for them personally, and that that's these revelations are still they're in the book, but they're still being found by people, and people are still putting them out there, and kind of other people are coming across them, which is wonderful. But you were saying that your book is still helping people and relevant to people, and that's almost, that's sad in a way that years on we've had these revelations and we have this awareness, but and members of the public, as we're saying, are coming to this and they're making health changes, certain percent of the population making health changes, but our public bodies and our policy makers have not moved this forward. And I was just going to ask why you think that is, and what can we do next to push that?
Well, that's kind of a big question, Claire. I mean, I would say just on the positive side, there has been a shift in the scientific community. So, teams of scientists around the world there's more than 20, almost 25 review papers really confirming what I set out to try to argue, which is that saying that, concluding that we should not have any numeric caps on saturated fats, that they're not founded in rigorous science, and there's quite a bit of science to the contrary. So the scientific community has caught on to a number of these ideas, right? The low-fat diet in name is over. The caps on cholesterol no longer, even though those ideas still linger on. But much of this science is just not reaching. It is not penetrating upwards. There's like a glass ceiling for the science. It cannot penetrate into policymaking bodies or into sort of the elite public health community, nutrition community. And the reasons for that are complex, but let's just name two of them. One of them we've discussed is that there's a tremendous amount of influence by the food and pharmaceutical industry throughout these institutions, right? And we haven't even gone into the influence of the whole fake food, the billions of dollars invested in the fake food industry that now wants to eradicate and push real food to the side, right? I think a second reason is that there's genuine cognitive dissonance in institutions, amongst university academics who simply, their entire careers have been built on promoting a certain way of eating, and they're unable to reckon with science to the contrary. So, the folks at Harvard who simply cannot acknowledge that the science has changed on saturated fats, for instance, and they're quite influential. A third reason, I think, is that these established institutions like the American Heart Association or the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they cannot make such significant changes because they will lose the public's trust, right? They cannot make a 180 on their policy and say, well, forget what we said for 40, 60 years. Now we're saying the complete opposite is good for your health. So, those are just three reasons. We could go into others, but and to your question about, well, what can we do? I think that I think the kind of work that we've done at the Nutrition Coalition is making inroads. I know it has. I know we haven't had time to go into all the various things that we've been able to do, but we are raising awareness and we are actually changing policies. And so supporting that, I think, is worthwhile. I think, starting a group like that in Australia and really trying to, be a watchdog for the process. That's one of the functions of our group. And actively, staying on top of them, that conflict of interest analysis that we talked about for the Australian Dietary Guideline Committee. That was something we published on the Nutrition Coalition on our website with your help. But there should be an Australian group doing something similar to that. And so I think, in a way, coordinating our voices so that we can be heard. Just look at all the other movements, the social justice movements that are out there that are so successful. We should be one of those social justice movements, because defending our health, our right to eat healthfully, our right to get good advice, our right to, to have good medical advice, accurate medical advice, to have good food in hospitals and not get sicker when you go to the hospital, those are social justice issues. So I think, to all the political organizers in your audience, that is something you can do. I mean, beyond just like teaching your friends and neighbors, but we all know that is like, that's not easy. Those conversations are not easy always to have.
No.
I don't like having them with even my family members.
That gives, supporting the organizations like Nutrition Coalition, Public Health Collaboration, and setting them up where they don't exist as well, following, sharing, and then, so just supporting in whatever way possible. But I'm going to jump on that comment about it's not easy having conversations even within your own family. So it just kind of leads me, as a mum, you have all this awareness, all this knowledge, and then you're changing your own diet, which you actually radically changed your diet, as you said earlier. Going from vegetarianism for a couple of decades of being a vegetarian or almost vegetarian, and so you changed your own diet, and then you're bringing up children in this modern world. So what are the real life challenges that you face? But and how do you get around them?
Well, I have to confess, I live in a household where if you go into my kitchen right now, you will find a loaf of bread, you will find a bag of chips, you will find granola, you will find all kinds of foods that I don't eat. But I have 2 teenage growing boys, one of whom seems to grow an inch every other week and does a tremendous amount of sports. And he's an adolescent, so on his body, he just eats what he wants. He eats what he wants to eat. But so what do I do to try to counter that? There's a rule in my family where you have to have your protein first. So so they know what healthy food is. And they know to prioritize that when they eat, and so they are not eating junk food, either of my children. And then I do try to provide them, with alternatives that are lower carb. So I use low carb baking mixes by, Rosetta's baking mixes, or I make low carb recipes from Maria Emmerich's cookbooks. I mean, our meals, I cook all our meals, and they're all pretty much low carb. So I've just kind of gotten them used to eating that way. They eat much, much better than their peers do. And, it is sometimes a challenge for me. I have to just not look at, parts of the kitchen. I have to be strong.
Yeah.
But I think you do have to make compromises. I don't want to completely alienate them from their peers by, not, for them, I don't want them sitting on the sidelines for a pizza party. I don't want them to feel awkward about that. We do live in society saturated by junk food. And in the same way that my parents didn't buy a TV the whole time I was growing up, and I would go to school and I just felt like an outcast. I didn't know what the after school special was. So, I don't want them to feel that way, but I'm, I've nudged them towards better food choices. And then my extended family, it's a little bit of a different story, but there's still skim milk in my parents' refrigerator, but they've switched to whole fat yogurt. So, when people are in their 80s, they're not that willing to change their habits.
Ask that because I'm interested, but I think it's really interesting. I think we sometimes, particularly, people see me kind of talking about food and being a nutritionist, and a lot of healthy stuff comes out of our house, and I'm talking about it, giving talks at schools, and but yeah, we face real world problems with and challenges getting our children to continue to kind of toe the line of real food predominantly. So like you, I take some hits. We've got sourdough bread in the kitchen that my son absolutely loves, and that's definitely not the only hit that we're taking though. So I got a call from the school like a few weeks ago now, and they were saying, "Oh, so we want to talk to you about your son. He's been caught selling soft drinks at school, so he's buying them." I'm there giving workshops on nutrition and in the community, and he's making
That's hilarious.
killing. He's doubling his money, selling them out of his locker. like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing.
That is hilarious, Claire. Wow.
And then members of my family, most of them, I'd say, I don't think I've got any kind of, obviously my husband is a massive real food, keto, but full on. But yeah, we do a very similar thing with our children. We try to get them to eat meat, very, very pro-protein. And that's what I work on, so that then that kind of satiates and gives them what they need for their brain and feeling confident, satiated. And I kind of still work on the 80% principle, that teaching them good modeling, eating a lot of home cooked food, a lot of real food, and then they've got to be out in the real world. I do remember somebody years and years and years ago giving me some advice and telling me that your children are yours until they're 18, as long as they live in your home. So don't let them have any chemicals or additives or sugars or sweet. And I did think then, well, you damage their mental health. We have a tricky line to toe, really, but we also have to not separate them from society, and they do need to know what some of this stuff tastes like and is. And mine's a little bit more complicated because my daughter has to be stricter for managing epilepsy, but my son is a different case, so he's out there. But yeah, I think that's an interesting topic to talk about, because we're talking about food, and I think a lot of people come to me and say that they feel that they've failed because everything's not perfect. So to be quite real and say, well, it's not perfect in my house, and my son's school doesn't think we're perfect.
Yeah. No, I mean, I see people on my social media feeds, and they are eating one meal a day, cooking these beautiful meals they put out every day. And I feel like there are people who are doing an amazing job of seemingly having the perfect diet. But I will say, like, I'm not one of those people. And I think that it's very hard if you have a family in our current day society, unless you're living out in the woods or you have an extremely supportive environment. It's very hard to, or a child who really has a special need of some kind, where you absolutely have to be strict. It's very hard to, and you don't want to socially isolate them from their peers. You want them to be able to go out and have lunch or have dinner with their friends and not feel like a freak. So, yeah, I mean, so we make lots of compromises. And again, I just, what I tend to do is I'll replace the sugar in recipes, and I'll make new ways of making their favorite cookies or cake. And I just do it almost without, sometimes I just don't even tell them, here's your favorite cookie, same as always. And they're not going to watch this podcast, so
I'm sending it to them. Yes, and
so a little bit of his little sly, I guess.
Yeah.
But you just do what you can to try to keep them healthy. And my overwhelming motivation is that they're dealing with a lot. Children are dealing with a lot in today's world, and I want to try to keep their bodies and also their brains healthy, right? I don't want them on sugar highs and crashes, because I know that will just make their life harder.
And that sugar highs and the crashes, and I mean, that's, I think, what keeps me motivated. I'm particularly interested in child nutrition and food for the brain. I think it comes from the differences we saw in our daughter when we put her on a keto diet. We saw her and talking to other people from the epilepsy community of how their child of all sorts of different development and ability levels switched on to some level.
You have an amazing story, Claire. I mean, the story of your daughter and people with her condition who haven't been on a keto diet is an amazing story. I hope you've told your audience that story at some point. Because it's really incredible.
Yeah, it is actually, and I am reminded when I in talking to different people, and it comes back to that for me. Even on school nutrition programs, and I heard you talking about this and emphasizing this. Meat and cholesterol, saturated fat, it's just important. It's so important for particular groups, vulnerable groups, young children, to be getting what they need for their cognition, for their cognitive development, at those years, and it really disturbs me to hear those types of foods being demonized, but also being taken away from children and young and pregnant mothers as well when the child is in the womb. So that's a particular concern to me, and another reason that I'm really, really passionate about promoting whole food, real food. Your message is of, getting these old-fashioned, traditional, nourishing foods back into the diet, because it isn't just a case of preference or policy. It's actually could potentially be damaging, brain development at a particularly crucial time.
Yeah, and reproductive health, your ability to have healthy children down the line, and the your ability to grow to be a normal physical person physically. I mean, all of those things are endangered by the lack of macronutrients and the lack of micronutrients. So your vitamins and minerals, those are the lack of protein for proper muscle growth, strength and muscle growth. I mean, it's really. It's just hugely problematic, I think, what we're seeing. And if we feed children poorly in schools, we're really setting them up for a lifetime of ill health and poor mental cognition and failure. So it's extremely urgent. I mean, I feel like that's why, why are we waiting another 5 years to start reducing sugar in schools? It's, yes, we'll just let another half a generation go and be sick and obese and diabetic. It is just so egregiously wrong to sell out the youth of this country to large food corporations, which is basically what we've sort of decided as a nation that we are okay with doing.
We're putting business interests first. We can't push them to do something right for the health of those children, because it would be quite inconvenient for them to reformulate their products. That's pretty much what they're saying. So I'll follow your campaign, and yes, just so important that gets heard and that message gets pushed, that these food changes get pushed through. I think we're running out of time. I kept you so long. So we can follow your work. Twitter is and Substack. They're the two.
And Substack. Yes. So I am writing a column on Substack. Please subscribe. Much of the content is for free. So please subscribe on Substack. It's called Unsettled Science. So you can find me there. You can follow and get the way you join the Nutrition Coalition currently, if you're in the U.S., is to go to nutritioncoalition.us and sign up for our newsletter. And we'll be developing a membership program there. And then mainly I'm active on Twitter at Big Fat Surprise.
You're very active, and dietary reform as well, the Nutrition Coalition. And yes, I read your publications to Unsettled.
Anyway, see you out there on Twitter. It's nice to see you, Claire. Thank you.
I'll let you get on. Thank you so much for taking the time and just kind of talking through some of these really important issues with me, but also for the incredible work that you put out there, and you're continuing to really make changes. So thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Claire, for having me. It's really nice to talk to you. And good night, and good luck with your children. Getting them away from the television.
Or the board games. Yeah.
Or the board games. All right. Okay. Bye. Good night.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.